The wind howled like a grieving mother. Ashes from the burning port of Nassau drifted through the night air, clinging to his skin like ghosts. Captain Elias Maron stood at the edge of the dock, blood on his hands, not from battle, but from betrayal. In his trembling fist, a rusted medallion still warm with guilt, his brother's medallion. He hadn't drowned. He hadn't vanished in the storm. Elias had left him to die, and the sea never forgets. Behind him, Blackbeard drank in silence. His shadow larger than the flames behind them, eyes like coals that had seen too many oaths broken. "You still hear him?" the old pirate muttered. Elias didn't answer. He couldn't, because every night, in every cursed dream, his brother whispered the same question. "Why didn't you come back for me?" Now 700 British soldiers marched closer, their bayonets shining like truth in the moonlight. And Elias had one choice left: surrender Blackbeard, or fight to the death with 20 wounded men who still called him captain. This isn't just a pirate story. It's a confession soaked in salt, sweat, and shame. Because the gold was cursed, yes, but it's his name they scream in the dark. Would you trade your soul to undo one moment? Because Elias would. He already did. Legends aren't just told, they're passed from sailor to sailor. If you crave the untold tales of the sea, loyalty, loss, and vengeance, subscribe to the channel and claim your place in our crew. Welcome to the Pirate's Diary. The black sails of the Revenant cracked like bones in the wind, slicing through the blood-colored dawn. Mist clung to the deck like the breath of dead men. Beneath that cursed canvas, 20 buccaneers whispered prayers they no longer believed in. They sharpened their blades, counted their bullets, and remembered every sin they hoped the sea had swallowed. Below deck, behind a door that groaned like it hated to be opened, Captain Elias Maron knelt alone in his cabin. A single candle trembled, throwing shadows across his scarred face. On the table lay a torn and faded map, edges burned, ink smeared with time and guilt. He had unfolded it 100 times, but today it felt heavier. It was the last thing his brother ever gave him, back in the rotting prison of Port Royal, before the chains, before the silence. "Promise me," his brother had said, voice low and cracked from days without water. "Promise you'll never trust Blackbeard. He's not a man. He's a shipwreck, wearing a man's face." Elias had nodded, and then Elias had broken that promise, because Blackbeard never offered gold, never promised fame, only one thing: redemption. And for a man like Elias, who once left his own blood to rot behind bars, that was enough. The candle flickered, the cabin groaned. From above, thunder cracked, not from the sky, but from a cannon fired in warning. British sails on the horizon. The Revenant was being hunted again. Elias gripped the medallion he wore around his neck. His brother's medallion, warm with skin, cold with memory. He closed his eyes, and the past returned like a wound reopening. He remembered the storm, the rope slipping from his hands, the scream from below deck. Elias! He had let go. He had run. He had survived. And the sea, cruel and unforgiving, had never stopped whispering his name. Above deck, the crew waited in silence. Blackbeard stood at the helm, still as a statue, darker than the storm clouds behind him. His eyes scanned the horizon like a man looking for death, or maybe waiting for it. "You've seen that map again, haven't you?" he said without turning. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Blackbeard finally faced him, and the deck seemed to tilt under the weight of his gaze. "You're not the first to beg the sea for forgiveness," he said, voice like gravel soaked in rum. "But the sea doesn't forgive. It remembers." One of the men spoke from behind them. "What's the plan, Captain? Do we fight or run?" Elias looked toward the east. where the sun tried and failed to burn through the red fog. He thought of the map, of his brother's voice behind the prison bars, of the day he betrayed him, of the nights that followed, where the ocean whispered the same question: "Why did you leave me?" He stepped forward, slow and hollow. "Load every cannon," he said, "and prepare the longboats." The men hesitated. "Captain?" He turned. His voice didn't tremble. His soul already had. "We won't outrun them. We won't survive them. But we can leave a scar." Then he handed the map to Blackbeard. "Take it. Get to the cave on Isla Roja. Finish what I never had the courage to start." Blackbeard stared at him for a long time. "You know you'll die here," he said. Elias nodded. "Maybe. But it's not about dying anymore. It's about where I'll finally rest." The last time Elias saw Blackbeard, the old pirate was disappearing into the morning fog, the map clutched in his fist like a secret waiting to be buried. As the revenant turned to face the enemy fleet, Elias whispered to the sea, "Forgiveness isn't given. It's taken, one cannon at a time." And when the first shot lit the sky, he smiled. Because the gold was cursed, yes, but it was his name the sea would scream for centuries. The rocks groaned beneath the weight of war. From the cliffs above the Devil's Cove, smoke crawled through the sky like black fingers choking the dawn. Below, on the battered sand, the last loyal crew of the Revenant prepared to vanish from the world, not quietly but in fire. The wind carried the sound of drums, marching boots, muskets clinking, 700 British soldiers led by Lord Aldridge, closing in like a tide of iron and fury. To them, Blackbeard was not a man. He was a plague, a ghost, a stain they had come to wipe clean. Up in the ruined watchtower, the lookout didn't blink as he spoke. "They're flanking through the cliffs, Devil's Cove." A pause. Then, "We're surrounded." Silence answered him, heavy, final. Then Blackbeard stepped forward, no fear in his eyes, no anger, only the calm of a man who had made peace with the devil long ago. He looked to the cliffs, where jagged rocks would soon echo with musket fire, to the tunnels behind them, packed with barrels of stolen powder, to the blood-soaked ground where 20 men still called him Captain. "Dig the trenches," he said. "Seal the cave mouth and pack the charges under the ledge." Someone hesitated. A boy, no older than 16. "But Captain, if we light it..." Blackbeard turned. His voice was soft, like thunder before the storm. "No one here will live to see the next moon." They moved like ghosts, quiet, focused, tired of running. Elias Maron wiped sweat from his brow and dug his blade into the rocky earth. The pickaxe beside him had snapped hours ago. It didn't matter. His hands would bleed before he stopped. He had followed Blackbeard into hell once. Now he was helping him build the gate. The memory of his brother still clung to him. The medallion around his neck felt heavier with each shovel of dirt. His brother had warned him, had begged him to turn back, but Elias had made his choice. There was no redemption left, only the price of betrayal. Blackbeard passed behind him, saying nothing. Elias didn't look up. But as the old pirate's shadow fell across him, he whispered low, "Will they remember us?" Blackbeard paused, just for a moment, then replied, "They'll remember the fire." At dusk, the British appeared over the ridge, redcoats glinting like blood in the last light. Lord Aldridge rode at the front, musket raised, a sneer carved into his pale face. He shouted through the wind, "Surrender! Lay down your arms, and I swear you'll die quickly." Blackbeard walked out from the trench. His coat burned at the edges, his face streaked with powder and soot. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a weapon. He simply looked up at Aldridge, then at the men behind him, a mountain of polished metal and hollow orders. And he smiled. "If hell opens tonight," he said, "let it fear us." Then he turned back into the darkness of the cave. When the explosion came, it was not a sound. It was a scream from the earth itself. The cliffs split in half. The sky turned red. British lines shattered like glass under the firestorm. Bodies and flame twisted together in a cloud of smoke that rose so high, some swore it touched the stars. And from that burning wound in the land, legends were born. They said Blackbeard was seen walking through the flames untouched. They said the gold hidden in the Devil's Cove still glows at night. They said no soul ever left that place and only shadows. But the truth? The truth is in this diary, buried under ash, soaked in blood and salt. Because those men never died screaming. They died silent, with the fire behind them and the sea in front. And in that final breath, one thought remained. If betrayal has a price, this was ours. The storm had passed, but the ship still groaned like it. Carried ghosts. Rainwater slid down the masts in quiet streams. In the captain's quarters, the candle burned low, and the scent of salt and rot clung to everything. Elias sat alone, the weight of silence crushing his chest. His hands were trembling, not from cold, from something deeper, something sharp and slow, like guilt waking up after years of sleep. He turned the old spyglass in his palms. It had belonged to his brother once, stolen from the Royal Navy, worn smooth by sea and blood. He hadn't touched it in years, but tonight, something felt wrong, like the past had teeth. And when he unscrewed the base, folded tight within the hollow, he found it, the diary. Thin pages, brittle with salt, ink faded, a few entries, some maps, names long forgotten, and then near the end, blood-stained, barely legible, the last words his brother ever wrote, Elias. If you're reading this, it's already too late. Blackbeard is not just a man. He's the echo of everything you were too much of a coward to become. If you fight beside him, do it for yourself, not for me. Elias froze, his fingers dug into the parchment, the words bled into him. Too late, too late. He could still hear his brother's voice, the one that pleaded from behind the bars of Port Royal, eyes hollow, wrists bruised. Promise me you'll stay away from him. But Elias hadn't listened. He had followed Blackbeard anyway. Not for gold, not for glory, but for something worse, to rewrite his shame. The candle flickered. The sea moaned outside the cabin. He turned another page, hoping for comfort, but what he found was memory, a drawing, rough and angry, of the Devil's Cove, a symbol carved over it, a warning, a grave. Elias whispered, "What did you see, hermano?" No answer came, only the creaking of the wood, only the ghost of a breath that once asked, "Why did you leave me?" Above deck, Blackbeard paced like a shadow that never quite touched the ground. The crew gave him space, not out of fear, but out of reverence. He was more storm than man now, the kind of figure men don't follow because they trust him, but because there's nothing else left. When Elias stepped into the cold night, the diary still in hand, Blackbeard glanced his way. "Found it, didn't you?" Elias didn't speak. His silence was answer enough. Blackbeard nodded slowly, then turned toward the sea. "I told your brother he'd break," he said. "Told him the sea eats men like him first. He had too much heart." Elias gritted his teeth. "He had more courage than both of us." Blackbeard didn't flinch. He only said, "Then why did he die alone?" Elias wanted to strike him, wanted to throw the diary overboard, wanted to scream until the wind took his voice, but all he did was clutch the pages tighter, because now he understood. His brother hadn't written to warn him, he had written to release him. That night, as the ship drifted into silence, Elias sat by the stern with the diary pressed to his chest. His brother's words echoed like cannon fire in his mind, Blackbeard is not just a man, he's the echo of everything you were too afraid to be. The truth sank into him like an anchor. He couldn't avenge his brother without becoming the same monster who doomed him. And maybe, just maybe, that monster was already staring back from the reflection in the black water, because some diaries aren't meant to be read, they're meant to be buried, so the sea never forgets what was lost. The rain fell like morning, heavy and silent. Not a storm, not yet. Just the kind of cold, quiet drizzle that made gunpowder clump and memories sting. The sky hung low over Devil's Cove, dark as the sea below, and the men and women on the shore didn't speak. They weren't waiting for hope, they were waiting for fire. No speeches, no prayers, no final commands, just the slow, grim rhythm of pistols being loaded, blades being drawn, and one last jug of rum passed from hand to hand. They drank with shaking fingers and tired eyes. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew exactly what was coming. They were the last crew of the Revenant, and tonight they would die not for gold, but for the right to choose how it ended. Delacroix, the one-eyed devil, they called him, sat on a broken barrel, patch soaked through, lips cracked from salt and silence. He had slit his own captain's throat in a cursed mutiny off Tortuga. Said the man was already dead inside, said the ship had begged for it. Now he drank in silence, eyes fixed. On the cliff, where Blackbeard stood like a black sail in the flesh. Beside him, Maria the Red checked the flint on her pistol. Her red scarf clung to her neck like old blood. Spanish-born, forged in fire, she had hunted galleons across the Caribbean not for treasure, but for someone she once called Hija, her daughter, taken by slavers and lost beneath the waves of a shipwreck no one dared to name. She wasn't here to win. She was here to be seen, to make the sea remember what it had taken. And, behind them, hunched against the rocks, was Jonas Flint, the last soul still breathing from the San Gabriel. No one remembered that ship, no flag, no wreck, no story in any port. No one, except Blackbeard. He had looked at Flint once and said, "You carry the silence of the drowned." That was all, and Jonas had followed him ever since. They were the damned, not because they were evil, but because the world had already forgotten them. Blackbeard never gave them promises, he gave them a choice. And that was enough. The firelight flickered in the rain, and still no one spoke. Until Blackbeard descended from the cliff, soaked to the bone, beard tangled with ash and time. He walked through them like a ghost who hadn't yet chosen where to haunt. He looked at Maria, at Flint, at Delacroix, at all of them. Then he said, low and sharp, "You all know what waits on that ridge, and none of you are bound to me." Maria stood. "I'm not here for you." Flint nodded. "I'm not here for anyone." Delacroix spat on the sand. "But I'll be damned if I let them write the last line." A faint smile broke through Blackbeard's scars. "Then we burn our names into the dark." They spread out along the ridge, placing powder where the rocks would break loudest, loading muskets that might not fire in the rain. They counted every heartbeat like a drum roll, like a fuse. The British would come soon, red coats, silver bayonets, promises of mercy that meant nothing. But on this cursed night, in this forgotten cove, 20 broken souls stood together under the weight of every ghost they carried. They would not surrender. They would not run. They would not be erased. Because death comes for all men, but not all men choose the hour. And these were the damned, and damnation was theirs to command. The flag was white, but the sky was black. Rain had stopped, but the ground still wept. The wind carried no scent of gunpowder yet, only the slow rot of old wood, rusted iron, and betrayal. Long ripened, the British messenger stood at the edge of the trench, boots spotless, voice too clean for this cursed place. He held a letter, a seal, a lie dressed in velvet. "Lord Aldridge offers full pardon," he said, his tone smooth as poison. "To Captain Elias Maron, if he delivers Blackbeard before dawn." The silence that followed was not confusion. It was the sound of men remembering every wound they chose to carry. Elias said nothing, but Blackbeard stepped forward, soaked from the shoulders down, his coat dragging like a shroud behind him. He studied the messenger as if trying to decide whether he was real or just another ghost sent to mock him. "And what does the devil offer me?" His voice was low, slow, deadly calm. The messenger swallowed hard. "Your story, written by the victors." The smile vanished, and Blackbeard walked away. That night, as the fire died low and the men dreamed of homes they'd never return to, Elias sat alone in his tent. The letter still, unopened in his hand. Its seal burned against his skin, like it knew the weight of the choice inside. He didn't sleep, couldn't. The words haunted him without ever being read. "Pardon. Peace. Your name cleansed." All he had to do was light a red-glassed lantern, the one hidden in his coat, prepared for just this signal. The British would see, the cannons would hold, the slaughter wouldn't come, Blackbeard would hang by morning, and Elias would live. Sometime past midnight, he climbed the cliff alone. The path was steep, cut by wind and memory. He kept one hand in his coat, not for the cold, but for the lantern that pulsed like a heartbeat against his chest. The signal, one spark, one final act of cowardice dressed as mercy. At the top, the wind screamed like a dying man. Below, the sea devoured the shore, endless and uncaring. He stood there, frozen, lantern in hand. And then, without a sound, a shadow stepped beside him. Blackbeard. He didn't speak at first, just watched. The horizon like it was something he'd already buried. Elias didn't turn, but then, "Thinking of surviving, Captain?" Elias hesitated, thinking of stopping. Blackbeard's smile was bitter, heavy. "That's the same thing." They stood in silence for what felt like hours. Two men, one story, one ending waiting to be written, and then Elias pulled the lantern from his coat and let it tumble from his hand, vanishing into the waves below. No light, no signal, no surrender. He didn't say a word, but Blackbeard placed a hand on his shoulder, not like a friend, not like a captain, but like something older, something darker, a man who'd seen too many men break before the end. "You're still a coward," he said, "but at least now, you're my kind of coward." They returned to camp in silence. The rain began again, soft at first, but by morning it would fall like war. And when the sun rose over Devil's Cove, no signal would burn in the sky, only the fire they chose to light themselves. At dawn, the world held its breath. The sea was still but not calm. Clouds hung low, pressing against the cliffs like the sky itself wanted to turn away. Mist swirled between the jagged stones of Devil's Cove, wrapping every cannon and every soul in a shroud of waiting. Then came the sound, trumpets, sharp, precise, cold as steel drawn across skin. The sound of war, not chaos, not fury, but order. 700 soldiers in red, marching in time like a machine built to erase. They weren't just coming to kill, they were coming to correct. And on the ridge above them, behind walls of earth and powder, stood the outlaws, the broken, the lost, the damned. Blackbeard stood at the front, coat flaring in the wind, his eyes locked on the line where sun met shadow, where the cliffs cast darkness across the sand. His voice, when it came, was not loud. It didn't need to be. When they crossed the shadow line, "Don't aim for the heart." He paused. Then, with a voice made of iron and old fire, "Aim for the pride." Among the rocks, Elias Maron loaded his musket without shaking. The lantern from the night before had sunk into the sea, and with it, every lie he had ever told himself. There would be no pardon, no clean escape, no false forgiveness. Only this moment, clear, sharp, final. He breathed slowly, not because he was calm, but because fear had already passed through him. What remained now was truth. And truth, he had learned, doesn't scream, it bleeds. To his left, Delacroix whispered something in French to a dagger he'd carved himself. To his right, Maria the Red traced the name of her daughter into the damp wood of her rifle. Behind him, Jonas Flint closed his eyes and murmured the name of a ship no one else remembered. Each of them still, each of them ready. Not for victory, but for memory. If they were to be erased, they would leave scars so deep the sea itself would limp. The British came closer, the red of their coats now visible through the morning haze. Boots striking sand, bayonets gleaming like polished lies. They moved like certainty, and yet they did not run, not yet. They did not see the barrels buried beneath the stone, the fuses hidden in the mud, the glint of rage behind every pair of pirate eyes. Elias pressed his back against the wet rock, musket resting across his lap. His fingers were steady now, dry, despite the mist. He had spent a lifetime chasing something he couldn't name. Vengeance, redemption, peace. But standing here, in the silence before the first shot, he understood what he truly wanted. Not glory, not forgiveness, just the truth. And truth doesn't come with medals or prayers. It comes with gunpowder. The first British soldier stepped into the shadow line. Elias raised his musket and whispered not to anyone, but to the brother he'd left behind, to the sea that never forgave, to the silence that screamed louder than cannon fire. Let them remember who we were. Then the gun spoke, and the silence died. And the sea first shot didn't echo. It shattered. A single crack of thunder in the stillness, and the head of a British lieutenant vanished in a spray of red mist. The smoke from Maria the Red's musket still curled in the air as the officer's body crumpled like paper into the wet sand. What followed was not battle. It was a storm, a howl, a symphony of powder, blood, and fire. Cannons belched flame from the rocks. Bayonets clashed against rusted cutlasses. Screams rose and vanished in the smoke like ghosts. Dragged down into the sea, the Revenant's crew, the last damned souls of Devil's Cove, fought like men who had nothing left to lose, because they didn't. Blackbeard moved through the chaos like a shadow torn loose from the earth. His coat burned at the edges, his twin flintlock pistols fired with surgical rage, and his voice, deep, guttural, soaked in salt and fury, rose above the madness like something pulled from the bottom of the sea. Hold the cliff! Light the second fuse. Aim for the face. Let them see who killed them. No hesitation, no mercy, only the wrath of a legend too old to die properly. Delacroix was the first to fall. He went down laughing, not screaming, not gasping, but laughing as a bayonet found his chest. Blood bubbled through his teeth as he leaned forward into it, pulling the soldier closer like a lover, whispering something in French none of them would ever understand. Then he dropped, still smiling. Flint was next. He had dragged a barrel of stolen powder behind enemy lines, tucked it beneath a cluster of muskets and red coats, and struck a spark with shaking hands. His face was calm when the flame reached the powder. His final act wasn't a cry. It was a choice. The blast tore through 3 soldiers and left nothing behind but smoke, bones, and the faint scent of burned rope. Blackbeard didn't flinch. And Maria the Red, screamed her daughter's name as she cut through 2 men with a rusted saber, her scarf soaked in blood that was no longer hers. She caught a third with her pistol, point blank. Then the flames swallowed her. For a moment she was gone, just smoke and ash and memory, but her voice echoed through the cove even after the fire took her. Lucia! A mother's scream, carved into the wind forever. Elias kept firing from the ridge until his musket broke apart in his hands. Then he drew his brother's dagger, the same blade that once slit ropes in the dark cells of Port Royal, and charged down into the red fog. Without hesitation, every foot of sand, every drop of blood was claimed like a vow. They weren't fighting to win, they were fighting to be remembered. The British faltered. They hadn't come for a war, they had come for a correction. But what they found was something primal, something buried deep beneath the waves. The crew of the Revenant didn't beg, didn't flee, didn't kneel. They burned, one by one, and each time one fell, another roared louder. The tide turned crimson, not with strategy, but with defiance, with the kind of rage that only the forgotten carry. And through it all, Blackbeard stood, not untouched, not unbroken, but unstoppable, a ghost in flesh, a legend made real, a storm in the shape of a man. Because this was never about gold, never about survival, not even about revenge. It was about leaving something behind, even if it was just fire. Only 5 remained, wounded, drenched, breathing smoke instead of air. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the soaked ruins of Devil's Cove. No formation, no banners, just scraps of men stitched together by rage and memory. Their blood mingled with the mud beneath them, as if the earth itself had opened to drink what was left of their defiance. Elias Maron could barely lift his arm, bone cracked, flesh torn. He held it to his chest like a child clutches something broken, not to fix it, but to keep it from slipping away. He looked across the field and saw the impossible. Blackbeard dropped his weapons, twin pistols, the blade he'd carried for 20 years, all of it in the dirt. The silence that followed was louder than cannon fire. Then the old pirate straightened, chest rising with the last breath of a dying storm. Rain rolled down his face like sweat from the dead. "Today," he said, voice cracked but sharp, "I don't fight for myself." He looked at Elias, then at the others, the bleeding, the limping, the forgotten. "I fight for the ghosts we carry." Then, with a ragged cry pulled from somewhere deeper than pain, he charged. 200 British soldiers stood between them and death. The ground shook beneath boots and thunder. But in that moment, 5 broken souls sprinting into the jaws of the Empire, the world tilted. It wasn't war anymore. It was a reckoning. Elias followed him, teeth clenched, arm dangling useless at his side. His blade was gone, his gun jammed. He fought with what he had left, rage, breath, and a broken heart. The final clash wasn't clean, it was brutal, a dance of blood and bones. Mud clung to their boots like hands trying to drag them down. Rain soaked the wounds faster than they could bleed. Eyes burned from smoke. Bodies slammed into one another with the weight of everything unsaid. It wasn't about tactics, it was about memory. Every swing a scream, every step a name. Blackbeard moved through the line like a dying god. He didn't fight to win, he fought to finish. One soldier after another fell beneath his fists, his elbows, his roar, anything he could use. Blood on his teeth, mud on his knees. He never looked back. When the saber struck him, deep into the ribs, he didn't cry out. He stumbled once, then stood again, and when the second blade tore through his back, he turned his head to the sky. Not with fear, with challenge. His eyes locked on the heavens, as if daring the gods to strike him down properly. And when he finally fell, it was not with silence. It was with presence, as if even death had to ask permission. Elias reached him too, late. The others had already dropped, collapsed in pools of mud, smoke, and breathless defiance. He fell to his knees beside Blackbeard, hand trembling above the pirate's still chest. But Blackbeard's eyes were open, wide, empty, unyielding, as if still watching, still waiting. And in that moment, Elias understood. This fight had never been about survival, not even about revenge. It was about carrying the ghosts and choosing where to finally let them rest. Rain kept falling, soldiers kept advancing, but nothing in Devil's Cove would ever be quiet again. Because the man they killed that day wasn't just a pirate. He was the last breath of every soul the sea tried to forget. A single mast stood crooked against the dying light, the last remnant of the revenant, burning slow in the bay like a funeral flame. Its black sail, torn and charred, cracked in the wind like old parchment. Ash drifted over the water, falling gently like snow that remembered too much. There was no victory, no glory, just the silence that comes after something sacred is broken. The British dragged Elias Drake from the battlefield, barely breathing, mud in his mouth, powder in his lungs, bones shattered, soaked in the blood of men he once called brothers. He survived, but only the part of him that could still suffer. In the prison at Port Royal, they gave him clean water and a blank page. A soft-spoken officer slid the quill across the table and said, "Write it. Tell the world," Blackbeard begged. "Tell." And then he wept like a child, "and you'll walk free." Elias stared at the paper for a long time. His hand still shook, not from pain, but from what he refused to forget. He dipped the quill in ink and wrote, "Here lies the name they couldn't kill." Blackbeard didn't beg, he didn't ask for mercy. Because men like him aren't made for forgiveness. They exist to remind us that freedom has a price, and there are fates worse than death. He never signed it. He never saw the sun again. No one knows where. Elias Drake is buried. No stone, no name, just a cell that rotted slowly into the earth. But sailors say that when the storm winds rise and the cannons fall silent, his voice returns, not through screams, but whispers, and not his alone. They say Blackbeard walks the decks of ghost ships, boots echoing through the fog, whispering in the ears of cowards, deserters and men about to make the same choice twice. Will you betray again, or will you fight? Elias died long before his heart stopped. Not when he fell, not when the British locked him in a hole, but when he realized the truth, that survival without loyalty is just a slower kind of death, that guilt is heavier than chains, and that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is refuse to lie. Some say the gold is still out there, but so is the curse, so is the fire, so is the name they could never erase, carved into the tide, burned into the wind. Blackbeard. Did you already know this part of the story, the part they tried to bury? And if you had been there in that cove, holding the red-glassed lantern in your coat, would you have lit it? What other names, what other ghosts do you think deserve to be heard here? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many others the sea has claimed. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten. This was a story sealed in blood and salt, a final page from the pirate's diary, and some pages should never be opened again.